feedback. Okay, so as I said, overall, wonderful job, thank you. I think the four of you, it became really clear how you've incorporated your feedback from yesterday and just getting to know the manual better, and so a lot of things really flowed pretty seamlessly. So I'll go through section by section. I'll also put in just a few little extra tidbits about things. So at the beginning, Chelsea, I liked how you got the verbal commitment again, warmly welcoming people. And then with the letters, when we came to those, there was a little bit of, I think, apprehension from some of the participants, like, who wants the going first? And I liked how you left that time and didn't just volunteer yourself. And so somebody naturally stepped forward after a minute. And that worked out really well. I liked that there was naturally an affirmation, that people gave the round of applause after the first letter. I would say probably about 80% of trainings the first time around, we don't prompt anything. I like to see what happens naturally. About 80% of the time people don't do any kind of affirmation. They don't say thank you for sharing, or there's no clap. They just move mechanically to the next person. It just feels kind of odd when that happens. So yeah, always please either have a little clap of hands, snaps, or something that works. And as you can tell, one of the differences about this versus a therapy group is we don't do processing. It's just about giving people the opportunity to share and to speak out against the appearance ideal. And one thing I noticed, a lot of people were kind of being apologetic for the length of their letters, either being too long or too short. I would just, as the peer leader, you could just mirror back to people saying everybody's letters are important regardless of the length, rather than people needing to feel a particular way about that. I already mentioned, kind of as a piece of advanced information, if people haven't done them, having them share kind of the bullet points of what they would have written so that they can still be included. And then also, if anybody feels uncomfortable kind of getting around that piece of maybe is there a paragraph they can skip over or something so that they can participate. One of the questions which Hannah had asked was, can you write it to your younger self? Actually, in another manual for this program, we do have that as an exercise to write it to your younger self. So yeah, writing it to your younger self, writing it to a specific individual, or to whoever people can write it to. And then Chelsea, I liked how you had a nice transition over to Jisoo. It was very natural. All the transitions today were really spot on. So the mirror exercise, Jisoo, you did a really nice job with that. The first time around, going around the circle, you are just talking about how it felt, like that was what happened. If you ever get people that start like reading off their whole list or something, don't be afraid to interject. I see that happen from time to time where people don't quite catch on to that and they end up starting to read into their list. And if that happens, don't be afraid to say, oh, okay, we're just going to talk about how it felt doing this for now. One thing I'd recommend, that we kind of ended up going around the circle a little bit diagonally. I just always recommend go around in a continuous circle from wherever it starts, just so people don't get skipped over. Because people often will talk about, well, what happens if somebody kind of wants to skip? Well, that's actually not that common in this group. But what could happen is you get a shyer person who gets skipped over, and they're kind of sitting there thinking, oh no, I didn't get to share. That just helps avoid that. I really liked your summarizing before you moved on from question to question, and also how you affirmed that people seem to have a positive experience. I think it's really important to mirror that back to people, no pun intended. The two things I always bring up here, you all I think actually did a really good job, and the fact that you started with, I think you said your legs as you did, and that's kind of what's prompted. Like I said yesterday, people are like sheep. So if somebody says something like smile, then you're going to get smile, hair, all these things that, while they may be a challenge for that individual, they're not as big of a challenge as the more typically challenging body parts when you think about butt, hips, breasts, the kind of things that people tend to really perseverate around. So if you are willing to go there with the challenging things, people will then be more likely to follow. The other thing I did not notice in this group was in terms of qualifications or any problematic qualifications, but if people do, some people will just say, I like my calves, or I like my thighs. Other people may say, I like my legs because blah, blah, blah. And in that scenario, if they say something like, because they help me to run, that's awesome. They're focusing on something that's not appearance ideal invested. But if somebody says, I love my legs because they're skinny, then what I would recommend in that scenario, as the peer leader, you could come in and say, oh, that's great that you love your legs. Can you think of something that's not as appearance focused, about maybe the utility of what that body part allows you to do? So that way you can kind of get people to shape it in that way. And then I also liked how, I think it was, Michelle, you said something that you were kind of on the fence about. I really liked, Sue, how you challenged her to say something entirely positive. That was awesome, how you did that. And then moving on to the role play. So the standard feedback I kind of give on these is, like I said, you're planting the seed. You're not trying to stage some huge intervention here and fix the person in 5 minutes, because if that worked, then any of us in the caring professions wouldn't have jobs. We could just do that. With the role play, what I recommend is, if you've got the group, if the individual is challenging you really, really well, keep stepping it up. Don't be afraid to get kind of extreme with some of your statements to see how much you can elicit from those folks. What would you say I might recommend if you get the opposite problem, though? If the person is struggling to challenge you, what could you do?
Could you potentially, like if they're really struggling, could you potentially switch them and have you be the person to kind of give them an idea, maybe?
Wouldn't necessarily switch it, but you're on the right track.
You sort of accuse them of
Anything else?
Maybe like tone it down a bit and kind of break down some of the arguments that you're saying and why they're not agreeing with you. Like she's saying, like, not like as intense as like, oh, something. Right? But like, they can like slow it down, the pace of it, and then start,
Yeah, so these are all kind of in that general direction. And if they're really struggling, can you just like take a little time out and say, I notice you're struggling to challenge me, and kind of maybe briefly throw back and forth some ideas about how to challenge you, so that you're getting that end result out of it. Most people at this point in session 2 will be able to challenge you, but that's where you'll really start to see where people are in terms of their process with this program is, can they easily challenge you, and if they can't, you probably see that kind of progress through some of these exercises. There's an expectation people are going to be able to have more of that dissonant process happening and be able to challenge more and more right off the bat. Um, For the role plays as well, Chelsea, you had nice processing of how it went for folks, the summarizing, you had really good eye contact and body language there. One thing might be that you, depending on how you're doing on time, you could potentially keep that processing piece just a little bit more brief, but it didn't run very long. For the body activism, Jisoo, you had a nice clean, clear intro. Then Sophie, you were really nice and clear at describing. I was also glad, Jisoo, you remembered to remind Sophie to share while she was at the board. That's something that easily happens when you're at the board, is you can often forget that you get to be part of sharing your items as well. So it was a great catch on that. One thing you can probably people think of is more kind of group society level as well, what kind of activism they can do, like maybe what they can do on campus, different activities that may already be happening or that you could get them involved in. Madeline, in a real session, it may be worth reading the whole big long
Yeah,
list.
I realized that after.
But that's fine for training purposes. And then I liked, as I said yesterday, it's only a mistake if you don't pick. I like how you caught yourself on the fact that, oh yeah, we're meant to go around the circle and share these, and then you did it. So awesome. That's good. Then Sophie, for the future pressures, you had a clear explanation of the exercise. So this is where you can see we're trying to put people on the spot here. This is why we don't have a writing section. We're trying to get people as we get closer to the end to think more on their feet. So related to that, why do you think we push on 2 pressures rather than people just listing one and how to respond to it?
I think 2 weeks you really think about different things that are coming up, whereas 1 it might just be, like for me, like whatever was on the top of your mind, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's there. But 2 really makes you think like, okay, this is something that's a recurring problem.
Yeah, it's really about most people, however far they're coming along in the program, will be able to rattle off one pretty easily. But this is making them kind of get out that little cognitive shovel and dig a little deeper and be able to come up with a second one on the spot. Make sure they do, sometimes people will just say what the pressure is and not how they plan to challenge it. So if you catch that as the peer leader, make sure you kind of jump in on that. I think you all did a great job with overall future pressures. Some of you were really good at thinking far into the future, particularly. Something that surprised me, maybe it will come up the second time. I was just surprised given how close proximity we are to Thanksgiving that nobody brought that up, because you all know those wonderful discussions that will come up from parents, grandparents, siblings, all those things. So, food for thought. Then, Sophie, it was nice how you went back to Amanda to check if the second one had come up. That was nice. Then the quick comebacks. Chelsea, you had a clear explanation of how the exercise was going to go. You were really invested. You were using body language as well, which is an important aspect of this. You were engaging people. As I had said yesterday, you can use some of your own too as peer leaders if you're comfortable doing that. So this is the time where if folks aren't challenging you, and I think all of you actually did a really great job first time out today of being better at challenging these. This is the time where you could stop for a second and say, I know this, but still kind of really didn't challenge this. It really still reinforce the adherence ideal. Is there another way maybe you could challenge it? Or you could throw it open to the group and say, would you like some help from the group? Most people probably will be, but this is the time where yesterday, like I said, in session 1, we don't really pounce on that person. Today, we kind of gently pounce on them if they can't do it. Because it's a great opportunity to really hit this home with them. And since there's usually going to be 3 of you, if it's too hard for you to be kind of on the go doing these back-to-back and listening really clearly for the responses, you could always have one of the other leaders listen to those for you, and they could dive in if they need to. In real sessions, do go around twice because those people don't have the benefit of being here for a whole day doing 3 rounds of this, so that's why it may seem long, but challenging them by still end up doing 4. And then also, Chelsea, you had a nice process of how people will challenge in the future, because that's really the taking this exercise into the real world. Like, for example, if somebody says something over Thanksgiving dinner that's really fat reinforcing fat talk, how might you actually challenge that rather than just letting it pass? I give an example recently at a training I was doing of I got into an elevator last year with it was mirrors all the way around, and this guy got in and he was eating ice cream. He was with his partner, and I think when he made this statement, he expected me to just kind of agree or like laugh along. And he was like, oh great, now I have to look at my fat self eating this ice cream in the mirror. And I said, don't body shame yourself. And I think that might have been the thing he least expected. Like, I literally could have said anything on earth to him, and it would have been less surprising. Which is kind of sad. And sure, that didn't reinvent the wheel right there. It's not going to change the world for him. But it changed the conversation and was unexpected. And at least then he might have a slightly different expectation of what will happen in the future with that. So that's the kind of level of how you can chip away at these things. Okay, so any questions, comments, feedback from anybody else on this first go around?
I think we just had one question. There's a part where it says, we'd like you to do at least 2 acts of body activism for next week, and then let us know how they go. So how the participants let the leaders know how that goes.
Sure. So at the end, when we get to the home exercises, you'll see that we encourage email follow-up from the peer leaders to the participants, so that you check in on how those exercises all go. And so that'll be something, whoever is setting this up, whether it's your different centers that are initially helping the students set up sessions, we typically recommend that it's easier for the professionals to, in the short term, handle the logistics and recruitment and things, and then as things progress, maybe some of you will want to step into a leadership role for the logistical piece, but early on, if you just have to show up with your manuals and lead, it's a lot less stressful, time consuming for you. But you will collect the person's email and stuff in that recruitment process, so that it will be made known that you'll get email follow-up. And then.
What about for like building relationships, like after the session, like if people want to stay involved or want to keep in contact or want to come back for another session, how do we just go about doing that, or what are your expectations for that?
Yeah, so one thing, and we'll, in a minute, we're going to segue into a discussion before lunch today about handling different scenarios. And so I think if people want, like that's particularly, if you find people running really long in a session, and they clearly really want to talk about a lot of these things, one thing you can even do is encourage people, we're here to get through the program and have this whole cognitive dissonance intervention happen. But if you all want to talk more about these issues and how they impact our campus and society, let's get a bunch of people together for coffee and talk more about these things. That's definitely something you can do. If they feel like they would benefit from coming back to the program in the future, by all means. Like one thing I have told folks is we know from our a lot of our pre-post and follow-up studies that most people sustain the full effects of this program for about 8 or 9 months before it starts dipping a little. So often how I frame it to folks is, especially if they're a younger student that's going to be around for a while, you can almost think of it like a flu shot. Like once a year, you could come back and re-inoculate yourself. The wonderful thing I can tell you all as peer leaders, Carolyn Becker's lab did a study about 7 years ago now on the effects on peer leaders specifically. And if you keep implementing the program, the effects just keep going like that for you because you're constantly exposed to them, which is really nice. Yeah, so the one thing which I'll talk about a little bit more is I would also though be cautious about if you get somebody who discloses like they have something going on in their world, sometimes they might try to like attach to an individual leader as that potential like cry for help support person, and we'll talk a little bit in a second about how to actually get them to professional resources and help guide them that way so that they don't maybe try to have any boundary kind of concerns that could be a burden for you. Okay, the question?
Go ahead. So instead of email follow-up, like mentioned, like another option would be like doing like a Google form open answer survey.
I think something that has like two-way connection is good, so you can give feedback. Like if you don't want to do email, the other thing you could do is if you have some kind of like community board or something, that you could then have people post what they've done, and then other people who've gone through the program can comment on it. But I definitely recommend something that is two-way.
Like a Facebook group?
Yeah, a lot of people will develop Facebook groups as well, but if they're going to be public or if people don't want to join, I'd still recommend doing something email or board-based after the sessions. Other questions? Do you have a question, Lindsay?
I just wanted to comment on what Hannah was mentioning as well. You know, the plan here at Waterloo is to also train more peers as this goes on. So for instance, in the example of like a younger first year student who's really interested, once we have an email set up, we can also let them know that they can like email and express their interest in being a peer leader at some point in time in the future. Because I know we'll be wanting to plan or train more students as time goes on, so that's something else that we want to share with them.
So what I'm going to do from here for about the next probably 30, 40 minutes until lunch arrives, gets set up, what we're going to do is kind of have this second little breakout of talking about, we'll have another little chat about implementation, but I want to talk as well about disclosures, getting people to resources, some of the challenges that could come up, so that you're actually equipped. Because what we've learned over training over the years is we bring you through this training process, you get to know the dissonance intervention, you're all ready to go out the door, but we want to help you anticipate the problems you could potentially encounter. And, you know, some campuses, people encounter very few issues, and that's wonderful. But we want to make sure, particularly as peer leaders, that you feel prepared rather than sitting in a session that you don't feel like is going well and kind of in a little panicked about, what do I do here? So what I'll do is start this discussion by talking a little bit about the kind of disclosures that often come up in sessions, and then ways people seem to often experience emotion in sessions, the different kind of techniques for managing those. And then I'll kind of pass it over to some of the local professionals if they want to talk for a minute or two about some of the resources and ways of getting people to help here. That will be more probably for a discussion after the fact at your little reunion meeting. But the first thing I'll talk about is disclosures. So, like I said yesterday, there's two things that we found. Yeah, and this is the time where you can be on the floor, stand, whatever you want to. There's, you don't have to be formally in the circle. If you need to grab water or anything, or if anybody needs to run out to the washroom or anything, please do so. Just don't all get up en masse and exit. So, it's like turns or something. But,
Sorry, I didn't mean to start that.
oh, no, that's cool. But the two things we recommend proactively that probably help reduce maybe about 90% of what we would call like uncomfortable incidents for folks. The first thing that I talked about yesterday is being clear in the advertising about what the program is and is not. So that it's about body image and about body satisfaction, and that it's not a eating disorder support group. It's not a form of actual clinical treatment in terms of a full-blown eating disorder. Then that way people know that what they're letting themselves into when they come into the room. The other thing we've learned that's really important is for all the things that might come up for people in a session, and we'll talk in a second about kinds of disclosures, things that people might be impacted by, for everything that's floating through their mind that they actually might disclose, there's probably a lot of other things floating through people's minds that they will not disclose. And that doesn't make that any less important or significant. So what we recommend is at the end of each session, having some kind of like little card or flyer about local campus resources and regional resources that you can pass out to every participant. Because then that way, if they're walking out of the session thinking about something that has impacted themselves, or maybe one of their friends or family member or partner, they can have those resources for themselves or just share with other folks. And I'd recommend even putting maybe a couple of national resources on there. So if they're not from this part of Ontario or whatever, they can know if they've got a family member somewhere else or something, how to get them connected to something. That way, you're covering a lot of bases. In terms of the most common thing people may talk about in terms of bringing up about their own journey, it's obviously not uncommon for people to talk about history of an eating disorder. If people are in recovery and they're sharing that about their recovery experience, that's just fruitful. It just adds to the discussion. It's nothing that needs to be done there. But if somebody brings up what's clearly a very active struggle to you, what we would recommend is that there can be the option of, if you feel comfortable doing it, then you can maybe at the end of the session see if you can chat to that person and ask if there are any resources that might be helpful for them. If that person is not open to that, or there's no opportunity for that, you've given them the list. And then something that some of the campus professionals can address is often there will be some kind of student affairs system within universities where you could pass that name to one of the professionals without violating any of the students' rights, but all that you will address how that's handled locally here in a second rather than assuming. Then the other piece, before I take a little breather, is emotions, how they tend to come up in sessions. So from our experience with trainings and following up with our campus collaborators around the US and Canada, what we've tended to find is that there are three different ways that emotions seem to come up in sessions. So the first being that somebody will share something or something will be said and it will maybe trigger something for that person, And you might notice that they tear up a little and are a little upset. And often, just allowing that person a little bit of space within the group, acknowledging that that it's okay to express your emotion. It's not something people need to feel embarrassed or ashamed about in any way. Just let them kind of have their moment in the circle. It'll kind of pass along. And that's probably the most common. I'd say probably like 70% of people is going to be like that. And sometimes you might even just want to ask them if, like for example, and I would always ask, in case they have a trauma history, but if they'd like you, if you're the peer leader next to them, would they like a supportive hand on their shoulder or something for a second? And that's kind of the most common. The second might be where somebody is clearly more upset. It's not just little tearing up, it's not just going to pass after a minute or two. And in that scenario, we probably recommend you could give that person two options. One, that it's fine to stay in the group and experience this. They don't have to feel like they're shamed for crying or experiencing emotion. If that's what they would like, by all means do so. But you can also offer them the option that if they do need to take a few minutes to go somewhere outside of the room, they can also do that. If they do that, if they choose the latter option, then the other options you could ask them are, would they like you to come with them? Or would they like to be by themselves? Because one of the nice things about having three of you is one of you could easily step out for a moment with them. And then if they say they don't want that, you could let them know, well, okay, well, I'll check in with you in a few moments. And then you could offer them the option of, do you want to come back in to the session when you feel ready? Or if you just don't feel like you want to come back in, you can always be excused. And there's no need to say, oh, Mary left because she's a hot mess. You can say something came up for Mary and she had to step away. So it's easy to excuse that. The third possibility, so I'd say that second piece kind of goes like 29.9% of the time. The other 0.1% is for some, and this is really, really rare. So take a deep breath. The chances of it happening are almost zero, but it could happen. We know of about 4 or 5 cases where people have reported it to us in the last decade. But that's out of about 200,000 people we know that have gone through the program in the last decade. Is where somebody is just completely overwhelmed with emotion and basically like flees the room in tears and in just a really bad space. One thing that's nice that we do know from the campus partners who talked to us about that, in all of those cases, it wasn't that the actual program triggered the person. It was more that this person, in each of these cases, had found the program as a venue that they could come to just to have people to talk to. And so they were all in pretty dark spaces to begin with. They just wanted to connect with some people, and then they realized everything was just too much for them, and they kind of fled. And so in that scenario, wanting to know what the local kind of crisis resources are in the highly unlikely event that happens, so that you never feel like this is a burden on your shoulders. You are amazing peer leaders who are going to go out and do wonderful work with this program. If that ever happened, there are people who are paid to have the burden on their shoulders, and that's who you should be connecting with. One thing we often recommend early on is, since you might be doing this at night, weekends or something, if there's like a staff member who wants to provide you their cell phone or something, so that if anything just ever feels weird, you can give them a quick call. But then if it's something, and that would apply across the board for any kind of scenario, but for something like this, knowing what the campus crisis resources are So I'm gonna zip for a second, take a little break from talking, and if there's anything that any of the Well for Waterloo folks wanted to briefly say, just about resources, prices, resources, things like that, and obviously we'll talk about it more at your follow-up meetings, but anything right now about any of this?
Is it common at the beginning of a session to go through some ground rules? I don't know who did that.
Yeah, I had a question.
You know, this may happen, this may trigger, this, and if it does, and go through some of the options or the confidentiality of the group or anything like that, and you know, that's the call for our lunch.
So, to answer the question in detail, what will basically happen is at the beginning of groups, we don't, other than maybe
What's on
saying
their face?
whatever happens in the room, stays in the room, whatever's,
Do you
I mean,
know
sorry,
where
whatever
you're
is said
going?
in the room stays in the room, whatever's learned in the room leaves the room. We don't recommend any kind of confidentiality statement. So one of the reasons behind that is with dissonance model, that when people feel vulnerable, they actually experience a higher level of dissonance. So by not mentioning the confidentiality piece, that actually helps with that process. And then what I've talked about over the last 2 days about having people, the expectation of sharing, that helps with some of that piece, that when people are feeling vulnerable, they know that, okay, everybody's vulnerable here. That kind of helps in that sense of confidentiality, and that people can't opt out, and we don't want people opting out. But the piece about what's said in the room stays in the room, what's learned in the room leaves the room, helps to kind of set the expectation that you're not going to walk out and talk about all of this with other students.
I was thinking that earlier too, and then I tried to go back to find it. Is that before they share it for the first time? Because it's not at the start.
No, I mean, so that's, we don't say anything.
Oh,
We don't have anything in there,
Right.
but you could say that if you want to
Right.
say something,
Okay.
rather than an actual confidentiality statement. Then the whole piece about, we would never recommend saying this could be triggering, because when you say things could be triggering, people are more likely to think, oh shit, I'm gonna be triggered now. And then maybe things will start coming up for them that might not, you could almost be predicting something. It's just like, the other thing is, if you put a box of tissues in the center of the room, people are like, what's gonna be said that's gonna make me cry? It's a lot of these things are actually better, and that's why we're talking about these things in how to manage them as they come up, rather than leading people down a certain pathway. Does that make sense? And like in here, we haven't had tons of outward emotional expression. It really can differ group by group. You'll see what happens. So.
We'll get to talking about QA and leader debrief at some point.
Yeah. Anything you wanted to all say about resources before we?
Yeah, so I guess it'll really depend on like what time of the day the training is happening. Because at least for us here at Waterloo, if it was happening during business hours, you could always have the option of walking the person down to counseling services, and someone's going to meet with them, even if it's just our intake worker. So you have that confidence in knowing that, you know, you can offer, okay, like I'd be willing to walk you down to counseling services. That could be someone who's really upset, or even someone who got emotional throughout and then connected with you at the end of the session. You can always offer to walk them down. And then with regards to after hours, or if it was ever happening on a weekend or anything like that, we'll make sure that you have handouts and things like that for local services like here 24/7, campus police, things like that as well, so that you have something to be able to give to people, but then something that you can use if, you know, extremely rare occurrences and kind of holds and feeling worried at all. Any other thoughts on there? And Jennifer,
I think during business hours too, health services is
Yeah.
available as well, and like walking appointments daily, and we have a triage nurse that we can speak to, and they can send it to that person as well.
Sometimes if they don't want to see a counselor, they might be open to going to see a doctor, and if they don't want to see a doctor, maybe they can see a counselor, so getting them connected at either of those places. And then even if they're not willing to go with you there, then we'll usually give you something that you can at least give to them when they leave that has the contact information and like what you can expect when you come into counseling services. So something like that to be able to give to students.
And what I would say, Hannah, the question you asked earlier about keeping in touch with people, when I made the comment about boundaries and things, rather than people being overwhelmed with emotion, it's much, much more common that people are going to maybe come up and talk to you at the end or something and say, I need help with X, Y, or Z, really depressed or struggling with eating, something like that. And so rather than them potentially latching on to you, what you could do, like Lindsay was saying, you can offer to walk them over to the counseling center, kind of be that moral support to help them set up their first appointment or whatever it is. And that is something that's definitely appropriate. You just don't want them to ever assume you're going to be their freelance amateur therapist.
And then one other thought I did have too, in the rare event, as you mentioned, that someone just like bolts out of the training and takes off and you never hear from them again, you can always call counseling services and make kind of a report. That sounds too formal, but it's not uncommon for us to get a call from an academic advisor or even a student on campus. Hey, I have this friend Jane, she's made this comment, or I'm feeling worried about her. And then every report that we get like that, we follow up, and we never share who made the report. Someone at the University of Waterloo community is worried about you, and we thought we'd connect with you. Would you like to come in and speak with the counselor? So if someone were to bolt and they didn't come back, if you knew their name from where they sign in when they come in, you could always just let us know about that and then have the peace of mind of knowing we're going to do that follow-up.
Sure.
Group, our team, where else could you go on our campus?
It's on Valley to the Walk that number.
What's that?
It's peer counseling, so we're just peer.
It's a small,
Yeah.
to turn to your house.
And they're open until 10, so it's an evening session during the week as well.
That's for all university students.
Sorry, could you?
It's very good to hear.
And folks who did kids help them. But they're all very close. Like, I mean, they've worked in the schools. Anywhere else?
Not necessarily for an immediate resource, but walking into somebody concerns about their diet or doing or support company, support groups.
Yeah, look at you. There's also like the medic hotline too, right? I don't know how late the medic hotline is open. I think it's 24/7 now. Okay, yeah, so there's that too. That's like a particular reason.
Counseling service also has walk-in every single day during the day from 12:30 to 3:30. And on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, we run our walk-in counseling hours over at health services, and that is from 5 to 7. Even if someone is there at 5 to 7, we will see them even if we're there till 8 o'clock. So if someone's thinking, oh gosh, we're almost at the wire, we will still take them in.
That's a great resource because there's a home doctor that sees like those things too, and it's quiet. So a lot of times even if a student is thinking about coming to walking with a 30 minutes getting close to the time, and they're worried about waiting for or something like that, they'll come at 5 or 5:30 and on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and it's dead usually.
And on Wednesdays,
involved. She is there on Wednesday evenings as well, and she's our specialist who deals with students who are at risk. And we already have some kind of pamphlets that we can probably use to find that.
Sam likes to talk about
I
cards.
do like to talk about cards.
So, as I said, take a deep breath on the whole chance of people voting. We just like to have you prepared, so that in the unlikely sort of scenario, whatever happens, that you know you're not alone. It's not going to be all on you. So what I want to do is kind of shift the conversation back a little to other implementation questions. When you were sleeping and dreaming about the body project last night, hopefully not having nightmares about it. Any other questions? Anything we didn't address fully maybe yesterday?
Okay, we mentioned in the script in session 1 that we'll be collecting all of the homework from people. Can we have an idea of what we're going to be doing with it so that we can make it clear to them? Because I am afraid that if we're collecting people's mirror exercises, they're going to hold back on the really intimate private parts of themselves, and I don't want them to have that restriction. So can we explain to them what we're doing with it so they don't feel like it's being shared?
Sure. So the whole idea behind collecting things, I'm glad you brought that up because we need to address that, is one, that by telling people at the end of session 1 that things are going to be collected, then they're more likely to do their homework. And that kind of goes back to like all the way back to like grade 1. If you were to tell somebody that you have the option to do your homework, well, no, I don't have to do my homework. So there's that kind of adherence piece. And then the second piece of logic behind collecting things is that along with the adherence, that when people have to hand things in, that actually pushes them to have done things and to have spoken out. It's part of that commitment. It's kind of like what if you were to tell your landlord that sure, I'll pay you rent at the end of every month. If you actually put something in writing, you're making a contract that you're going to do these things. That's where a lot of that comes from. I think it is definitely appropriate at the end of session 1 to remind people that you're not going to be certainly with the mirror exercise, behavioral challenge, all of those things, you're not going to be like publishing them or handing them out. If you were going to be using them for a research study or something which was done in our early years, they would be going to some kind of file with faculty. But assuming you're not doing something like that, which is the most common nowadays, you would just be collecting them and then you would be shredding them. It would just be an active collecting, so you could let folks know that they will just be destroyed. The mirror exercise, on the other hand, you notice there is talk about posting it. So what we recommend there with the mirror exercise is, you notice there's the option of hand it in, but take a photo of it, so that they get to keep that. The other thing we found a lot of campuses talking about is reversing that. So that instead of, if that person has written that and they want to keep it, asking them if you can take a photo of it, and letting them know that the plan is that you will, without disclosing their name or anything, you might build like a little catalog of those and post them on a Facebook page or something so people can see them with any identifiers they removed. So you can do it the opposite way. And that's really where the mirror exercise collection came from. But like I said yesterday, you are not going to be the body project collection police. If somebody really doesn't want to give you something, you don't have to get into it. It's also a recommendation. That kind of makes sense. And I saw we have other requests, so Diane.
Just
In terms of the letter, so as far as shredding it, I just thought about it last night. What if, like, at the end of the session, we gave it back to them and said, instead of saying dear young girl, we for yourself, so that it kind of, is there shredding it, or
Oh,
still
so the
using
letters,
it?
I wouldn't recommend shredding. The letters,
Oh,
if you're gonna
sorry.
collect those, you would keep them for some kind of activity. But you will find that in the home exercise at the end of session two, to write a second letter. So you're kind of on a path to predicting what's coming.
So what do the handouts require signatures? How we
I think
all-
that's just about your signing and affirming your commitment to these things. That's why we, yeah. Commitment.
Oh, no, like we send it in, or.
And if they really want to keep it, and they've clearly shown you that they don't, yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify, we shred the list, the mirror list?
And the behavioral challenge letter, they had those in, but the letter, we would recommend compiling those. It can be really, and so there's another thing you can do with letters. This is in our high school clinician-led manual, which is also used in other settings. And the other thing you can do if you have such a system in place is you could select the letters and stick them in an envelope and mail them back to the person that wrote them 6 months later. And when you think about in 2017, how often do you actually get real mail anymore? Everything's either a bill or a junk mail item. So how nice could that be? Imagine you open that on like a dark, like wet morning like yesterday or something, and you're kind of like in a really blah place, and you get this letter in the mail from yourself talking about rejecting the appearance ideal. So that's something you could think about the logistics of doing. Yeah, so
I just wanted to add to what you just said. When I was in high school, I wrote a letter for one of my classes in grade 9, and the teacher who did the letter gave it to us like graduation of grade 12, and it was like a really interesting experience to see like what I had written like 4 years prior. So it's a good idea.
It is a good idea just to start at water, because some people in the co-op program, they don't know where they're actually going to be in some months.
Well, you can always ask for like the style of your full address. Yeah, or email, you can email them like to you.
Yep. Then I'm going to segue from that to recording sessions, because that's another similar topic. So what we typically found now, that especially when it's more for adherence than for purposes of any kind of research, audio recording is perfectly sufficient for these purposes. People tend to get a little bit more comfortable with audio recording. Part of the video recording used to be about the vulnerability and the dissonance piece, but for quality control purposes, audio recording is just as solid. And so you would have people, if there's any kind of consent form that's required on your campus, have to agree to that. And then the purposes behind that is, since the professionals are not in the room, what they can then do is listen to some excerpts of those audio files and make sure, not that any of you would do this, but we know of campuses where the body project has been taken by peer leaders or even rogue faculty and staff members who change things, and it suddenly becomes this very different program that is not effective. And so that's where that comes from. So that then when the staff supervisors are meeting with you all, they can give you feedback on things that go well or not so well down the road. And most people are fine with the audio recording. One thing you can recommend if people ever are apprehensive about that is, nobody's done it in here, I think, over the last couple of days, but that if people are going to talk about another person's experience, if they use a name, make sure they don't use their full name, so they don't have to worry about anything really identifiable on there. Yep.
What's the, I'm kind of thinking a year in advance, so let's say we get to the summer and maybe some of our peers are graduating and we're thinking we need to train some more. What's the best kind of recipe for success of our involvement and also peers who are remaining of training another group of peers that are going to come the next generation? What are the successes and what kind of tips can you give us?
So for the most part, you as peer lead, and this will also completely define your roles for what happens beyond today, is for the most part as peer leaders, you are being trained to go out there and deliver the program to your peers. If you wanted, you could also be involved in implementing it, for example, in a high school, but we recommend focus on building. We've watched some campuses that have all these great ideas and then they kind of spread themselves so thin that everything is like mediocre success rather than being really successful. But you will be primarily involved in implementing and leading sessions. If down the road you want to get involved in the program at more of the professional level, you can talk with the staff about how you can gradually move into that role. Or if you go to another university for grad school or something, you can email me and we can look at bringing the program in there. As I said, we're committed to at least a couple of these grant-funded trainings per year in Canada. And there are people like Gail McVeigh trying to actually get some more funding for us to do much larger things with the program, particularly in Ontario, which is grant funding at the moment all around the world is a hard thing to get, so we'll see how that goes. But then for the professionals, so your primary role is going to be as training future peer leaders. We don't want you to train new professionals unless it's to work directly as your kind of hand-holding buddy in this, because that's where things have also gotten watered down. So we like to have involvement of direct training of any professional that's going to operate independently. But in terms of the structure of training more peer leaders as this grows, to answer your question specifically, Sam, what works well for most groups is, so either one or two of you will lead a 2-day training for a new group of peers. You could bring in some of the existing peers to help with that process, but it's not necessary. And since you don't have to fly from far away to come and do this, the 2-day training could be, for example, let's say 2 Fridays or 2 Saturdays consecutively. We recommend them not to be more than a week apart. But that it will be the same 2 days of training, and 1 or 2 of you basically filling the role that I have for the past couple of days to regenerate and grow the program.
One thing we were talking about this morning, I was wondering about like how can we keep our relationship with Waterloo too? Like, have you ever had schools who've continued the training process together? You were talking about 2 schools in, was it Winnipeg?
Yeah, so I'll check if they're continuing to do that.
Training together or not.
So it's really common for schools to train together at this initial training. I would say probably about half of all our trainings in Canada and the US have two schools. It's also a great way of us making the best out of the grant funding, of getting in 2 places at once. But in terms of ongoing collaboration, that is something unless I have a sense that there could be something in Winnipeg. So the University of Manitoba and Red River College in Winnipeg, they came together last November for training. And they may be, because of their very close proximity, doing the same thing. I'll get you connected with the folks at both of those. But no, I think that would be great if you want to continue this process. And you could even have some crossover. They were actually talking about, because I think there were less students from Red River College, they were going to actually have maybe even some of the peers mixing between the 2 campuses. Yeah.
Maximum number of trainers to be trained at a time? This is about it?
So we recommend for the peer leader training 12. So we used to do 16, and about 2 years ago I was starting to lead. It wasn't that common that we would have the full 16 at a training, And I led two in a short period where we had the full 60. It takes longer because you have to do 4 of these rounds instead of 3, because it's only 4 is the most you would have. And so we were going like 9 till 6 day 1, and like 10 until 5 the second day, or 9 until 4. It was draining people. It's amazing the difference that extra round makes. So that's why we started going it to 12. And 12 is the ideal for 2-day training. With 9 being a minimum. So I think I had told Lindsay, like, if for some reason we didn't have all of you wonderful folks sign up for the last couple of days, we would have had 1 or 2 of the outside folks have to jump in if only 6 of you had signed up or something. 8 or 9 is really the minimum for a productive training. And then if for some reason, the way this program gains momentum is really you being the ambassador. So all of the traditional media, posters, flyers, social media, all of the advertising will do of this. You as walking, talking advertisements for the program is going to be the most successful. The 2 things we recommend is don't grow too fast, but also don't grow too slowly. So we've seen it kind of be like the Jenga tower. If people try to grow too fast, it just all collapses on them. And I had that personal experience when I was in grad school, running this on the campus. We grew way too quickly and it became unsustainable, and I left and it all fell apart because it was too big for the person who then took it on in a smaller role. But the scariest thing for me is when I reach out, let's say campus training in September like this, I reach out in January, it's like, how many sessions have happened? 0. It's like, okay, that's
How many
not
do you
possible.
recommend in that school calendar, or like
Yeah.
between now and January, how many should we have kind of given it a go?
So I recommend before the kind of Christmas holidays break comes around, definitely each group, if we were to say there's the 3 groups in here, and you can mix that up, you're not going to be assigned to these groups forever. So for each person to have had a minimum of leading 1 set of sessions, but optimally 2, I would say. So to have, so each session being 2 hours, 2 sets, so 4 hours per set, so 8 hours that you would have given between now and December to doing this, if you can get the participants signed up to do that. And like I said, friends, all these other peer leaders, all these people from other programs that are early adopters. Then ongoing, once you get into the new year, most campuses are asking people to commit to 2 sets per term. If you have more time than that and more demand, by all means. If you have less and can only do 1, then talk with the professionals about what you can actually commit to. But that's kind of the growth. And we've seen like some really large, particularly there's 3 huge universities in the US that each have over 50,000 students, where by starting out with an initial group of 12 like this, the University of Indiana has now grown to 120 peer leaders because they did that over 6 years. It was gradual and it's sustainable. But for a lot of campuses, somewhere between 12 and 24 peer leaders may be where they ultimately will end up wanting to be for an average size university down the road, and so that you can actually meet potential demand. Because the great thing about a university is every year you cycle one group out and another group in, and there's an opportunity. And like we talked, the going through things again if people want to re-inoculate themselves.
From the professional side of things, you're not recommending that professional train another professional to kind of do this side of things. What do you do if you wanted to get more staff on board, or maybe there's turnover in staff and that we need someone else to have the knowledge that we've gained? What do you recommend then?
So what we recommend, like I said, you could have somebody who's trying to do your buddy, kind of like side by side, but we just don't want them to go off and operate independently. So if you have a new colleague that you want to kind of have come sit in on sessions see what it's like, and then work alongside you, absolutely fine. But if you ever reached, and this happens with some universities, and that's now why we train at least 3 or 4 from each campus, is because of turnover. That if you ever reach a point where it's just you, and then you email me and say, I'm the last survivor and I'm leaving soon, then we could obviously look at coming back in to do another training. But if it's just gradual attrition, the other thing we'll look at sometimes is there's somebody who really wants to be trained to operate independently. Maybe we're doing a training in Toronto in 6 months. Could we get a space for that person to go there? Or the person is from BC and they're going back to visit family anyway at some point, and we're doing the training in Vancouver, maybe they could go for that. So we look at practical ways to get people additional training at minimal cost. Our whole goal with this program is to keep costs down and to get it out to people. That's where we differ from a lot of higher education programs that are really about making lots of money. And that's never been our mission. Our mission is to make the world a better place. Anything else? So it looks like lunch is ready. So what we'll do today, we'll break for about 40 minutes since it's a shorter day. So we'll be back probably around 12:35 or so in seats, and I'm ready to go. Sound good?
It's the top of station. Meats, no meats.